I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but...
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple. This is the show where I rant and rave about board games, but let's be honest, I tend to rant more. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first I'd like my sponsor to have a quick word with you. As gamers, we find it hard to deal with empty shelves, some worse than others. You therefore want a supplier that has what you need at affordable prices and delivers on time. For me, that supplier is Kiender. They offer a discount on bulk purchases as well as a point scheme for future acquisitions down the line. If there's a hot title you're after, chances are Kiender's got it. Wingspan? Mine. Arc Nova? Mine. Eclipse? Actually I hate that game, it's terrible, but you might like it. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to Kiender and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So today we're taking a look at Terminus. Terminus, oh blimey. Remember the other games that they tend to do? Draft and write records, a low complexity roll and write. Earth, which I'm guessing is in the game bag, as let's face it, when is it never? You know, the mega hit for their engine building, but again, a light engine builder. Now you've got what looks to be a very chunky Euro, and probably not a thematic one as well, probably a dry, chunky Euro. This definitely feels like it's leaping out of their comfort zone a bit, but as much as it's about trains in a sense, you could argue it's about trams or whatever. Honestly, the theme is fairly non-existent once you get delved in, but I was curious about this because I like it when publishers do this kind of thing where they venture out of their comfort zone, because you see like Cool Mini or Not, for example, you know exactly what kind of game you're going to get from them, because let's face it, they don't do anything but their usual shtick for games. So it gets a little bit boring and repetitive after a while. But when a publisher comes by and says, well, we normally do this, but now we've tried this, I'm like, okay, I'm intrigued. Yes, it could crash and burn. There's a pro and a con to venturing out of your comfort zone, but I'm always eager to give it a shot. And so this one I figured would go down well with some, meaty gamer friends of mine, but from the demo I got at the UK Games Expo, I realized that, okay, this one is definitely chunky, but not necessarily rules intensive, so this one has some potential. Well, it's been given the beans, both multiplayer and solo. The question is, did it succeed?
Ooh, short answer yes with an if, long answer no with a but.
In Terminus, each player is building their train network through the city in order to place them next to developments for special abilities, but also to place stops in various places to fulfill customer demands, score victory points, and achieve objective project cards. The game carries on for 3 rounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot to a round. Players will have a little avatar that they will move around this rondel of actions at the top of the board. When you do 3 cycles of this board, that is when the round will end for you, but the round doesn't fully end until every player has done their 3 cycles, and then instantly move on to the next round and then do another 3 cycles, rinse, repeat, and then total up the points at the end. But the actions that you do involve buying resources, of which you have various ones like blueprints, permits, and energy, and these work under a supply and demand system. So these would normally be completely filled with the resources, and when you want to buy the resource, you look at the current price, buy as many as you like, and then whatever the new price is, that depends for the next player. So the more of these that get bought and held by all the players, the more expensive they are to buy, supply, and demand. But then you also have construction cones as another slightly more free and easier to obtain resource, which you need in order to buy, build train tracks. You can buy the train tracks for money, but then you will have to actually try and lay them out on the board. The board is set up in a grid system with the tracks laid out in as different dashed lines, a bit like in On the Underground, if you ever played that one. And when you build train tracks, you essentially lay them out while placing these little stops from your player boards. They're normally placed on a dual layer board, like, try to get it better there, yep, like so, and then you take them off when you can build them, and you use them as stops. But you could also connect to other players' stops, and doing so will reward them, but it also rewards you, and it makes life a bit easier for you to get around. It's more expensive to put your own stops down, but of course it's also worth more points. There are also a few other actions where you can place Meeples on these project cards, which are essentially objective scoring. You can also obtain agenda cards, which represent little personal objectives, which is kind of similar to the projects, but just basically smaller scale and more personal. And you have these developments that you can build. There are 3 different colors. These are just the red ones, for example. There are only so many in each game, and you'll not use them all, so there's a little bit of variety. But these represent really cool special abilities that players can have. You spend permits to build them, and you essentially place them in between all the train tracks on your board, and one of your meeples will go on them to say, you have that ability. But another player could also use the ability if they place a stop near you and put one of their meeples on it. So you do share these abilities with other players. But the developments give you an alternate action to use at various steps around the cycle, and these will always be discounted actions or more powerful versions of what they already are. They also have little customer demand hexes on them, where if a player has a stop in that particular district and they're also next to this development, well, no, they don't even have to be next to that development. If they just have a stop in the required area, then they can potentially grab the customer demand, and it's worth points. The last little bit on the side is that you can grab upgrades for your board. So you have some slots for a couple of upgrades, and these upgrade tiles, which are currently in the box, they effectively give you like a really powerful ability, like having a wild resource, or having an extra action, or being able to move lobbyists freely, the little meeples I mean. And so you can grab those as well. So there's a fair amount of different ways that you can play, and a fair amount of different ways that you will, be able to utilize your resources. But what it boils down to is essentially a rondel that requires an obscenely good level of good resource management. Like, you really do not want to make mistakes in this game. We'll talk about that a bit later, because resources are going to be tight, money is going to be tight, space is going to be tight, particularly with a lot of players. And so it's a case of, can you make your strategy work better than the others to score the most victory points, and not screw yourself over along the way.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Terminus is not for the faint-hearted. This one requires a lot of planning, a lot of thought processing, and a lot of strategy in order to do well. And that's not to say that your plans could not get messed up during the way based on what other players do with the whole supply and demand market. If you want a thinky Euro game, this is definitely one for you. But one thing that, that may sound good or bad depending on your perspective, but one thing I was surprised about is that there's not a huge amount of rules in this game compared to a lot of other heavy Euros. Some heavy Euros have like a massive encyclopedia of rules that you've got to get through, but Terminus really does not by comparison. It's not the smallest rulebook in the world, but there's a lot of pictorial examples here, quite a lot. And even though there's still a few, fair few rules to go through, it really isn't as bad as some other games. You'd be surprised how quickly you can get into a game of this. Now, that's not to say you're not going to be rules checking on a regular basis, more on that a bit later, but certainly I was quite surprised that when I was learning the game, it's like, oh, so there's the rondel, these actions work similarly, this is that. Okay, fine. And you just need to spend a bit of time learning how to build rails, because that's easily the most kind of fiddly aspect of the game. But quickly you're like, oh, fair enough. Let's get going. And I'm not saying that this game is a cakewalk or that any schmuck can learn it. It's still a heavy Euro. And if anybody tries to tell you it's a midweight Euro, then they are lying through their back teeth. But it's, compared to a lot of heavy Euros that demand a lot more rules investment and time from you, I was just genuinely surprised on how much on the lower end of that scale this is. And you can have a heavy game have not a ton of rules and still be heavy, because a heavy game is not just rules investment, it's also what you do during the game that makes it heavy.
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
The interaction with the players is a little bit greater here than in other Euros. Not to say that it's fully player interactive, but you really do need to pay attention to what the other players are doing in this, because you can track everybody's resources. They have limited storage on here. You can only store so many, and you know exactly what the potential is for players to do. You know if they have a chance of nabbing your demand token because you can see where their stops are. You can see whether they're likely to place rails or, grab an agenda that you want this round, because you can see if they can even afford to do that. But you also have the board itself kitted out with everybody's, tracks going every which way but loose. And so you might be deciding, well, hang on, I need to get over to the old cross over here. When it's like, well, I'm stuck over here in Tarragon Hills. How do I get from here to there really quickly? Well, I could go through the middle, but that involves me putting a lot of rails down, a lot of stops. I don't have the capacity yet to do it. And so how else am I going to do it? But then my friend, for example, has built into the middle, and you're like, well, hang on a minute, if I go a little bit around the outside, I can piggyback off your stop. That means I don't have to put as many stops down. I just need a couple of extra rails. That's doable. And so there is a nice little bit of, you know, kind of leapfrogging on other people while they're there, although this can still create those moments where it's like, oh, you took the only single route there, oh, you git, you know, or you nabbed this demand token before I could. And so there's definitely an element of, you know, utilizing where other players are to help you a little bit, but then also being screwed over by the other players getting to something before you do. One aspect that helps with that is the idea that when you do use one of their stops, you get an energy and they get a little bit of cash. Now, by the late game, that little bit of cash doesn't really mean that much, but grabbing an energy, I mean, it's kind of worth it at times. Just having that free resource that could be anywhere between $1 and $3 in itself and just be useful for the action that you want to do. So I'm glad that there is an element of that. This is also helped by the development tiles, which are probably my favorite aspect in this game. I like these because you got the 3 different types. You got blue, green, and red, and there's not a huge amount of difference as to why they're blue, red, and green. They're just abilities at the end of the day. But the idea with these is that they're built all over the board. They're built at different times because players can, you know, go to this action, pay a permit, and build them. But the fact that these abilities are not only varied each game, I mean, there's not a ton of variation. You might find that I'll use, say, 4 out of these, maybe 5. Yeah, in a 4 to 5 player game, you'll use 5 of these tiles. Well, that leaves 3 spare. It's not that there's a ton of variety, but there is some variety, and this is done with all 3 stacks. And that was from a 4 to 5 player game. If you're playing this with 3 players or 2 players or solo, you're going to use even less of these. And so, you know, games can play out quite differently depending on which one of these are available. But the fact that different players can build them and other players can piggyback on them, again, adds to that level of interaction, but also gives you some cool options to try. Like, you know, somebody grabs this one that allows you to grab cones as well as grab a couple of rails, and it's like, well, that's pretty nifty. They go and build it here, for example, in the you know, in this area, and it's like, well, I'm only a couple of stops away and I'm going in that direction anyway. You know what? I'll build some tracks. Yep, we'll just head down there nicely, put another stop there, and then I'm just about to come round to this action to put a lobbyist down, and you know what? I quite fancy that ability as well. And it, you know, it does. It's great that you can put these down yourself and go, right, I now have this cool ability, but I also like that I can kind of, you're not hijacking it, you're just sharing another person's ability.
No, he got the upside, I got the downside. See, there's 2 sides to every Schwartz.
The game certainly is very meaty, and there are some bad aspects to this. We're going to go on to those a little bit later, but from a good side of things, if you want something that's going to make you think, you know, have a thinky experience as well as test your limits of resource management, this game is the one, because money is so tight in this, and it is literally needed for just about everything that you cannot afford to run out of cash at any time. If you are broke, you pretty much can't do half the actions on this board. And the others all require permits or blueprints, and again, if you don't have any of those, you can't do half the actions on this board. But for those of you who want a really heavy strategic game, this one is going to do you well because it's going to force you to plan ahead. Now, this does have the knock-on effect of generating probably the most analysis paralysis I have seen in a heavy Euro for a long time, because wow, there's so much that could go wrong. And so you can't afford to just take a turn willy-nilly, because even the slightest error could trip you up and, you know, screw you over. And this is definitely a negative of the game. I'm going to elaborate more on it a bit later. But on a positive note, I do find when I'm playing this that this is really making me sort of knuckle down and go, right, well, hang on, if I do this, okay, all right, I can do that. And then when you do pull off a good turn, it is very rewarding. But, you know, of course, those turns are few and far between. We'll see about that later. But it's definitely very heavy, definitely very meaty, and from a heavy Euro game perspective, which, like I say, I do like heavy Euros, it's definitely ticking that itch.
Dear God, what is it like in your funny little brains? It must be so boring.
For a heavy meaty Euro, this game is also pretty quick to set up. The insert is pretty decent. I mean, you can sleeve cards, but you will find that they start trying to pop out of some of the cubby holes, so I'm almost kind of regretting sleeving these. I might actually take the sleeves off, frankly, because I don't think you need them. You don't really shuffle a lot of cards, and I think I was just kind of overdoing it. But you've got clear cubby holes for all the development tiles. You've got, you know, enough baggies, you can easily put the resources and all the other things together. Boards sitting here, they're dual layered. You've also got convenient places where with a single bag you can bag up all the player components, put them in a nice little slot, and then they're there. It makes setup a bit of a breeze actually in multiplayer because you just give everyone a board, their pieces, they organize it themselves. The resources are probably the most fiddly bit. You have to get them on these little supply and demand bits, but that doesn't take too long when you share the load. And then you dish out a few developments at random, a few upgrades which are fixed, a few agendas that you deal out, and a couple of projects at random. You know, I mean, yes, there are, you know, pre-described setups in the book, but honestly, I didn't actually find that was necessary because the abilities on these things are fairly varied and not the most, you know, like easy to follow at the best of times. That using the prescribed setup in there didn't really make the game feel any easier than just simply doing it at random. So, you know, doing it at random will certainly speed the setup a lot more. But yeah, some heavy games take like half an hour to set up, and I've already made, you know, said my piece about how long something like Voidfall or, you know, these big monstrous games take to set up. This one though is an absolute breeze.
Barely an inconvenience.
So let's touch base on what I was saying about this whole thing being very demanding and very thinky. Yes, from a good perspective, this really does make me, you know, really churn the brain cells and get down and involved. But the problem is that this game is probably one of the most unforgiving games I've come across. If you muck up at any point, it could kill your game, or it could severely kill your tempo. And one of the problems that this has is this whole rondel system. I'm cool with the supply and demand mechanic, that's a really cool aspect. I'm glad that you've got all these different actions that overlap other zones so that, you know, you can skip one zone but still do the action you wanted to do, all well and good. But if you muck up to the extent that you run out of cash, or the resources get overpriced to a point where you can't afford them anymore, sometimes you may find that you have to go around the entire cycle again to get what it is you need. But you only do 9 cycles in the game, 3 sets are free. To effectively void a cycle in this is 1/9 of your game gone.
And it's gone.
And that is pretty painful and pretty hard to recover from. If you start off badly in this in the first year, you won't win. There's no like, oh, I'll start off really badly and then suddenly I'll spring to action later on. You won't have enough turns in the game for that to physically happen. And it's, as much as it's rewarding to have a turn play out like really well, it takes so much build up to get there. You might think, all right, I'm going to do this massive build of train tracks and a couple of stops here and there. But if you want to make this efficient, you need to build a ton of stuff at once and not just do it in little bits. If you do it in little bits, I don't see how you would physically have enough permits and cones to be able to do that. So you do a lot of steps. Step 1, get this. Step 2, get this. Step 3, get this. Step 4, get this. Step 5, get this. You know what, I don't want to do it this year. Right, we'll go around another again, right? Step 1 and step 2 and step 3 and step 4, and then maybe on the second cycle you go, right, now I'm going to do this massive build, and that massive build will feel great, but man, have you got to go through a slog to get there. And if any of those steps go wrong, it will completely mess up the game plan that you were thinking of doing. And this works well for some people, but I have played this with players who are instantly turned off by that. You know, they get to a point where they just don't feel they can do anything. Like, you know, particularly in the last year of the game, the last round, you might have a situation where close to the end of the game, you might, oh, I've now run out of money. I've got nothing. Or even at the start of the game, this could happen. You know, you could run out of money, be broke. Now I can't buy any resources. Do you have a permit? No, well, you can't do all of these actions as well. So what exactly can I do?
Nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
You know, permits and money are so essential in this that not having any of them is pretty much game over if you can't get a decent amount of them at any time. They're just so tight. And it's not great for players when they do trip themselves up and fall into this trap. Then you might use the argument, well, get good then. That's all well and good, but then how many players are going to come back to this game repeatedly if it constantly beats them up every time and makes them feel like, you know, each game? You know, you want players to be able to recover from a mistake, whereas this one doesn't let you recover pretty much at all.
Just give us a fucking chance, you son of a bitch!
The game is also definitely, as I said, going to generate a ton of analysis paralysis. I mean, the amount of planning you've got to do in this takes the analysis paralysis to a whole new level of comprehension, to the point where it says 25 minutes on the box. if you can do this in 25 minutes on the box, I'll be very, very impressed, because that is hinting that it's less than 2 hours with 4 players. That is
never happened.
Liar! Liar!
And oh my god, it goes up to 5. The player count goes up to 5. I'm going to stress, I've not played this with 5. Because I can't think of anybody with a sane disposition who would want to play this with 5. This game is easily 3 hours with 4. This is a long Euro. It's going to have you thinking, it's going to have you planning. You cannot play this at light speed if you want to have any chance of doing well. 25 minutes a player is way, way off. And bear in mind, that's not even including the setup, which, granted, there's not a huge amount of setup, but still, it's there. There's still a reasonable amount of takedown, though. But 2 hours for 4 players? No! That's just not happening. And so, you've got this very lengthy Euro, which I'm already thinking it's too long with 4. There's no way I'm playing it with 5.
5 is right out.
Now, I said the rulebook was not bad earlier, but it's still not perfect. There are still, some bits in there where you have to kind of read it a couple of times to get used to it, particularly with regards to how you build rails. That bit is this whole big section on it. You get through a bunch of these actions, it's like, yeah, that's easy, that's easy, that's easy. Then you get to how to build, and then it's this mammoth thing that you've got to, like, oh my god, so hang on. So there's a restriction there, but you do that, and then you've got to pay this, providing you've got capacity. It's like, oh my god, it really does get a little bit harder to do that. The biggest problem, though, is as much as I do like Duval's art, generally, with a lot of his games, I mean, honestly, I thought this was Ian O'Toole at first with the style he used. This definitely doesn't look like his typical thing. The difference between someone like Duval's and Ian O'Toole is that one has had a lot more experience doing graphic design than the other. Not to say it's terrible, but there are some development tiles in a few areas where the iconography isn't quite as intuitive as I would like. The board abilities, not too bad, although again, they still put these arrows in very strange places that make things look a little bit weird. But the development tiles, you're definitely going to be looking up the book to understand how some of these work, because there's just icons all over the place. And on occasions, there's times where like an arrow, I think there's one development tile, I forget which one it is, where it's talking about the top of your board, there's a little bonus that you get, and the way it's shown as icons really doesn't look right when you're thinking, well, hang on, that's the one above, so why is the arrow pointing like that? That doesn't make any sense, and it really does throw people off from a starting perspective.
I don't get it.
There's also not that many ways to actually play the game per se. As much as you've got these different projects and these different development tiles with different abilities, you are still effectively playing the same game each time. You get a bunch of developments out, you get a bunch of resources, and then you build the tracks, and then you lay them out and connect up some stops. That doesn't change from game to game, and so the game still feels quite linear despite what different abilities can come out, but also because the scoring is not particularly varied either. There's not that many ways you score in this game. Most of it comes down to the demand tiles that you take from, the demand tokens, that you take from these developments, for having a stop. You put them in a row on your board and score so many points. Then you've got your personal little agenda cards, you've got the public project cards, and then you get points for your stops on the board. That's pretty much it. There's nothing else to really, this by no means, this is far from a point salad. Okay, there's not that many ways to score, and scores are going to be quite low. I mean, the highest score in this particular game was 64, lowest was 40. You don't score many points here. But the problem is that I'm not sure the scoring is entirely balanced, because the personal agendas that you've got, they're fine if you are able to achieve them to a basic extent, but they don't score you that many points unless you're willing to use a meeple on them and really do them well. But also, you draw these at random at the start, and some of them are more lucrative than others. Like, I might draw one here that caps at 5 points, and it's like, well, I've got to put 4 hubs down within these 2 particular areas, which is not the easiest thing to do, and all I'm getting is 5 points. But then somebody draws another one at the start of the game, which requires me to put 8 stops, whatever, within 3 different districts, and it caps at 10 points. Now, I don't know if that's much harder to do than getting hubs out, because hubs require you to get your capacity up to a big degree and get an upgrade and such. So the fact that this one is 10 points and this one is 5 points, there's definitely some agendas that I'm glad to have pulled at the start of the game, and some that I'm really not wanting to play at the end. But then you can draw more as the game goes on, but it's restrictive if you do them in later rounds. So at the start, using up a whole action to draw an agenda point for a cost of a permit is quite expensive. But later on, you might get into round 3, spend a permit, draw 1 agenda card, and it might be completely useless, or it might be perfect and scores you another 5-6 points. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with having a random element like that in such a long, involved board game. But then the projects. You've got a lot of these different projects, and I am pleased that they are very varied, but typically they involve you building lots of stops on particular things. But when it comes to points, you get 1 point per stop next to a development. Whoopie-doo. No, not really that great. You get 2 points for a hub next to a development, and 3 points for a hub if it's next to at least 2 developments. Being next to 2 developments is easier than you think in this game. I mean, especially when you've got 4 or 5 of you, like putting developments out all over the place. Being next to 2 of them is easy, and they're 3 points per hub. Why would you build a lot of stops? And what doesn't help with that is that some of these projects will specify stops or hubs. We had one game where one of them involved me having to get from one end of the board to the other, and I got points for doing that, right? And I built a lot of stops. So I couldn't build many hubs because to do that objective, it required me to build a bunch of stops. So I get maximum points for that, about 22 points, but I only get about 7 points for all the stops I've made because they're all not hubs, right? Then another player has an objective project that they use, one of these, that says build hubs that are only adjacent to at least 2 developments, or like some other thing of using hubs. Okay, so they focus on that. Again, they also do the card in full. They get 22, 21, 23 points. No real difference there. But they get to score a bucket load more points on this aspect. So whereas I'm only getting 7 points max for having, stops all over the place, this other player is getting 15, 17 points for having hubs, which also then gels with this. Which then makes me think, well, why am I building stops then? And what this has done is that it's now pigeonholed players into knowing exactly which strategy you should aim for from the start of the game. If I see anything here that requires me to build hubs, chances are I'm going to aim for that. If it just wants me to build stops everywhere, I probably won't bother. Stops you've built, yeah, that's well and good, but 13 stops is a lot of stops, and it still only gets you 1 point more than any of those other projects that I did. But if I just deal with hubs, then I'm getting, the points for the card as well as loads of points on here. Why would I go for something other than hubs? It just doesn't feel like it's particularly worth it. The demand tokens are definitely worth grabbing, 3, 6, 10, 17, 25 points. They can add up quite well, but it's very hard to get more than 3 of them. I did pretty well to get 4 of them in one game, but to get 5, that requires not only a bucket load of developments to be built, but also for you to conveniently get them before other players nab them off you. That's a tall order in itself, and you can't really base a strategy on that because it doesn't take much for another player to just come in and go, yoink, and it's like, oh, well that sucks then. There's no real plan, you can't really plan ahead for that. There is a solo mode in this game as well. However, I'm sorry, I don't think this game works with solo. There is an AI deck which basically you flip a card and it will tell you whether it's going to harvest certain resources or like take a certain project or take a certain demand token. These are pretty easy to operate, but man, does it have an insane setup. You've got to blank out the board, set it up for a 2-player game. Then you've got one AI that you have to build their entire network at the start of the game. Blimey. And the rules for that are not the most intuitive in the world. And then you've got the second one, which you have to set up with, particular starting setups. And then this one will build track as you build track throughout the game. But it's very easy to avoid their tracks because one of them's already on the board and I could be doing something on this end of the board, but then the AI could be all the way over here and we never meet. Other than that, it's just occasionally nicking something that you might want and you're just playing a solitaire experience. But on top of that, on top of the big setup and the lack of any meaningful control or interaction with the AI, you don't use many of these developments because the AI does not build developments. Only you do. So the abilities that you get through the game, like the best aspect of this game, you don't see very many of. my best part of this game is, put to such a minimal level, which kills a lot of the solo experience for me. So I gave the solo experience a try, but I can't see people wanting to play this solo. You want the players building in all sorts of different directions, doing different types of strategy. You want the unpredictability of where they might go next. Will they build over this bit? Are they going to take that before I get round again, or are they going to skip it and try and wait, in which case do I have a chance? That is part of the enjoyment of this game, and the solo mode just completely removes it, and as such, after trying the solo mode, I'm never going to go back to it. Terminus is a bit of a mixed bag, but overall I think it's veering more on the positive side. There's definitely some aspects I really do like. I mean, it is produced very well. It's a bit of a stark artwork design, but it still looks nice on the table. And I do like the screen printed wooden resources and these chunky rails. It is a very nice production. I do like the fact that it's really meaty. I mean, I like resource management games in general, and this one is really going to test your limits of resource management, both with the supply and demand market, but even just planning ahead for what it is you want to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. It's a lot of hurdles to jump through, but it's satisfying when you do pull those turns off. I just kind of wish that those turns happened more often than not. And kind of where this game starts to, fall apart a little bit is more just how punishing this game is and how long it can take. 25 minutes per player is extremely optimistic. I doubt you are ever going to reach that target ever in your lives unless you play with the fastest players imaginable and you all know every single rule off the top of your head without any rules checking at all. Good luck trying to get to that position with this, because that is quite a tall order. For most people, this is going to be a 3-hour game, potentially longer, and with those 3 hours comes a lot of thinking, a lot of room for being completely screwed, and a lot of analysis paralysis potential. So you're not in this for the short run, and you're certainly not going to find this very forgiving. And some of you might want a game like that. For me, I like the meatiness of it, but the fact that it is so unforgiving really does skew the results a little bit in terms of my enjoyment, because I might have a game where I'm doing quite well and obviously I'm enjoying it more for that. I don't need to win a game to enjoy it, but at least I feel like I'm contributing and doing good stuff. But if you're in a 3.5 hour game of this with 4 or 5 players and you are on the back foot at the start and things just go wrong for you, you're stuck, you're done, hello pseudo knockout, and that is not something I like to see in a game. The graphic design is okay, but it could be improved in places. The game balance with the scoring, I think, is a bit flawed. I think you're going to have to do some clever curating of these, project cards. Maybe remove any that specifically talk about hubs, because I think when you've got something that utilizes hubs on here, combined with how hubs score normally, I think that the point scoring is just too powerful in that respect, and it's easily going to win you the game. And in all the instances where there's a hub project, going for that combined with this has won that person the game. It's never been any different. So there is a lot I am liking, but there's also some fairly big bits that can get in the way. And it's not that they happen every single game, although some of them, like the length and analysis paralysis, God blimey, they happen every game. But the whole punishing aspect is really going to depend on whether you do well at the game or not. And unless you have played this game a lot, you are going to make mistakes. And even though I've played this game a fair few times, I'm still making mistakes. And so, you're going to have some games that go well and some that you're just knocked out early, pseudo knockout, and then you're kind of just stuck there going through the motions knowing that you can't possibly win. And that doesn't feel as enjoyable. So there's more positive than bad here. But still, this is a game that I would say, you know what, if this is the game of the night, I would play it. But I don't know if I'd be the one to suggest I want to play it. I wish that the solo mode was a lot better. In the box itself, I think the solo mode is really lacking and cuts out a lot of the great stuff that you get in multiplayer, to the point where I will never touch this solo. So I'm really looking at 3 to 4 players only, which is, again, being a little bit restrictive when it says 1 to 5, but also with the fact that it's very long, you're going up against a lot of other really long Euros that I think I would probably rather play, because those long Euros would just be that little bit more forgiving, and especially for when somebody is new to the game. So it's more positive than bad, but I think overall I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It's above average. Do like it, do like more of it than what I dislike, but those bad things do get in the way quite a bit. And if those could be improved, like an expansion came out with like a quick start variant or a quick play variant, like a light speed variant, whatever you want to call it, and if they kind of just made it so that the freedom was brought back a little bit, like it wasn't so stupidly tight, so you eliminate some of that pseudo knockout area, and of course, you know, add maybe some revised reference aids and just a couple of things to make some of the iconography a bit clearer, then those could have easily brought it up to an endorsement level rating. But 6 out of 10 is still respectable. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Don't forget to check out the other content I have done. I've done, well, it depends which order I do them in, but you might find a review for Empire's End out as well. And of course, I did a recent top 10 where I talk about my top 10 tips for running a board game club, so hopefully you get some enjoyment out of that lengthy discussion. Let me know your thoughts on this. Do you agree with the negatives? Do you think it's you're way too long, way too punishing, or do you actually find it's none of those things and you've played it somehow in a quick time and you've got enough freedom? What do you think about the scoring with the hubs? Do you agree on that? I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Until next time, remember, regardless of whether you want to wear your traffic cones like a hat, it's still only a game. So bye for now.